Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a really fascinating critique of modern materialism, E.F. Schumacher's Small is Beautiful. This text fundamentally challenges how we think about wealth, work, and the natural world. It asks a pretty radical question. What if we built an economy that actually served human beings, rather than just treating us like expendable cogs in a giant machine? Let's get right into it. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll hit the problem of production, consuming natural capital, the idolatry of gigantism, Buddhist economics, and wrap up with technology with a human face. Part 1. The problem of production and the illusion of unlimited power. So, have we actually solved the problem of production? Most experts and politicians seem to confidently agree that mankind has finally come of age. But the source material hits back hard on this. It argues that this is just a fateful illusion, one that's totally rooted in this modern arrogance that we're somehow an outside force meant to dominate nature, rather than a fragile, dependent part of it. And here's the core of that argument. Modern economics makes a really fatal error. It treats our invaluable natural capital like it's just easily replaceable income. Think about it. Fossil fuels, the ecological tolerance margins of the earth, even basic human well-being, they're all treated as totally expendable items. Now, a businessman wouldn't consider his company viable if it was rapidly burning through its own capital, right? Yet the text argues that is exactly how we're running the entire economy of Spaceship Earth. Which brings us to part 2, consuming our natural capital and the collision course we're on. Just look at the staggering disparity in fuel consumption documented in the text. Back when this data was compiled, populations in wealthy nations were burning through over 4.5 tons of coal equivalent per person. The poor? A tiny fraction of that, roughly 1/14. To put that in perspective, if the world's poor suddenly started consuming at the same rate as the rich, global fuel consumption would literally triple overnight. We would rapidly, completely strip the planet of its once-for-all endowment of cheap fuels. And that brings us to a fundamental paradox. Infinite growth in a finite environment is an obvious impossibility. It just doesn't work. An attitude to life that seeks fulfillment strictly through the single-minded pursuit of wealth simply does not fit into a finite world. Why? Because it contains absolutely no limiting principle. Because we are quite literally consuming the earth itself. The source argues our approach to land management needs a radical overhaul. Instead of treating agriculture like it's some giant factory just trying to pump out maximum yield, we absolutely have to prioritize 3 things: health, beauty, and permanence. The idea here is that only when we deeply respect these values can true, lasting productivity naturally follow, acting as a byproduct rather than some destructive primary obsession. Moving on to part 3, the idolatry of gigantism, scale, and human nature. To really grasp this modern obsession with massive scale, the text introduces a concept called meta-economics. Think of it as a crucial reality check for standard economics. The argument here is that any economic calculation is dangerously incomplete if it just ignores the actual human and natural realities it's built on. Economics has to take instructions from meta-economics. Basically, things like health, beauty, and human dignity have to matter just as much as market prices. Okay, this number from the source's calculations is going to blow your mind. 3.5%. That is the estimated amount of total social time actually spent on direct productive work. Just 3.5%. The rest of the time, we're bogged down in administration, distribution, or endless meetings, just entirely cut off from the simple, grounded joy of actually creating things. The text points out that this setup deprives us of deeply fulfilling, hands-on work with our brains and our hands. And this idolization of gigantism has made society dangerously footloose. We're seeing mass migrations into these massive, overcrowded megalopolises, which inevitably leads to rural decay and the total breakdown of stable social structures. When everyone is hypermobile, communities just fracture into alienation and stress. We're social creatures, right? We need small, comprehensible groups to actually thrive, not just survive. So, how do we fix this alienation? Part 4. Principles of Buddhist economics and a whole new paradigm. Let's compare these 2 paradigms side by side. Modern economics basically says consumption is the absolute end-all be-all purpose of economic activity. But Buddhist economics, as outlined in the text, flips that entirely. It treats consumption merely as a means to an end. The actual goal? Maximize well-being with the absolute minimum amount of consumption. In this framework, work isn't just some chore we want to automate away. It's actually meant to nourish human character and let people use their faculties in a genuinely dignified way. The text leans really heavily on this idea of permanence and restraint, brilliantly captured by Gandhi's famous quote, "Earth provides enough to satisfy every man's need, but not for every man's greed." The source suggests that stepping back from our endless cultivation of needs might just be the true foundation for global peace. Think about it. If we're constantly expanding what we need, we're just increasing our dependence on outside forces, which inevitably leads to conflict. Cultivating simplicity isn't just nice, it's presented as a deeply rational approach to living on a finite planet. Let's bring it all together in Part 5, Technology with a Human Face, and the proposed solution. The big, actionable remedy advocated in the text is something called intermediate technology. Instead of relying totally on insanely expensive machinery, like, say, a multi-million-dollar automated factory, intermediate tech focuses on highly accessible, smaller-scale equipment. It's vastly superior to primitive techniques, for sure, but it's simpler, it's cheaper, and it's much gentler on the environment. Plus, it leaves ample room for actual human creativity, putting power back into the hands of the people actually doing the work. Which sets up an absolutely crucial contrast: mass production versus production by the masses. Mass production is heavily capital intensive, it burns massive amounts of energy, and it's often literally violent to nature, frequently turning the human worker into just another servant for the machine. Production by the masses, on the other hand, mobilizes our priceless human brains and hands. It's decentralized, it's ecologically gentle, and most importantly, it's designed to serve the person, not the other way around. This shift toward intermediate technology is presented as an absolute game changer, especially for developing nations trapped in what's called a dual economy. The text explains that in a dual economy, you have these highly advanced industrial enclaves in the cities that completely bypass the massive, impoverished rural majority, sometimes leaving behind up to 85% of the entire population. Just throwing expensive, super advanced technology at these areas usually worsens unemployment and drives even more people into city slums. What they really need is self-help technology that can be applied right then and there, directly within rural communities. To wrap up this explainer, we want to leave you with a final, provocative thought straight from the source material. Pursuing unlimited growth and prioritizing giant scale is clearly driving ecological and social breakdown. So we really have to ask ourselves, are we going to keep building a system of mass production where humans are just servants to the machines? Or will we finally choose to build production by the masses, technology with a human face? The choice is entirely ours.